Emily Carter could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders as she entered the grand ballroom of St. Thomas Hospital's annual charity fundraiser. The golden chandeliers above glittered like a sea of stars, casting their warm light over the wealthy elite who floated around the room, their laughter as smooth as silk. The clinking of glasses and the hum of expensive conversation filled the air, but Emily's presence felt like a disruption, a stark contrast to the polished environment. She wasn't supposed to be here. Emily's job was simple: serve drinks, clear empty plates, smile, and stay out of the way. She was just another face in the sea of hired help, invisible to most of the people in the room. But as she moved through the crowd, her eyes caught the occasional glance of those who thought little of her, a waitress, not worthy of even a passing thought. Among the crowd was Richard West, a towering figure who held more power in one hand than most people held in their entire lives. A billionaire businessman and philanthropist, Richard had made his fortune through investments in the medical field, including a major pharmaceutical company that supplied drugs to hospitals worldwide. His presence was like a storm, sweeping through the room, his laughter booming over the softer voices of the others. As Emily walked past, her tray of champagne flutes balanced gracefully on her arm, Richard's sharp eyes locked onto her. With a smirk, he leaned toward his companion, lowering his voice just enough for her to overhear. "You'd think they'd have a better class of staff at an event like this. What's a waitress doing here, surrounded by the top doctors and influential people?" The comment was a subtle mockery, but Emily caught it with a practiced ease, not letting it show on her face. She had heard words like that her entire life. They didn't sting anymore, but they were a reminder of how far she had fallen from the dreams she had once held close. Richard's daughter, Jessica, stood nearby, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of boredom and disdain. She was everything that Emily was not: beautiful, confident, poised. Jessica was on her way to becoming one of the top doctors in the country, and her father's legacy was already mapped out for her. Emily had once dreamed of walking the same path, her name on the lips of doctors and patients alike, admired for her knowledge and skill. But those dreams felt like a lifetime ago. As the evening wore on, Emily moved through the crowd, her steps silent but her mind racing. She passed through clusters of doctors and wealthy patrons, overhearing snippets of conversation about the latest medical breakthroughs, new drugs, and the latest celebrity gossip. It was a world that felt as foreign to her now as the languages she once studied in medical school, a place where she was only allowed to be a shadow. But then, just as the clock struck 10, the atmosphere shifted. A sudden commotion erupted across the room, a sharp gasp cutting through the low hum of conversation. At the center of it all was Alex West, Richard's son, the heir to the empire. He had collapsed in the middle of a conversation, his body crumpling to the floor like a rag doll. A high-pitched cry echoed across the ballroom as someone called for help, and a sea of doctors rushed to his side, their faces pale with concern. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had known Alex, but only by reputation. He was charming, intelligent, and poised to inherit his father's vast fortune. A young man with everything at his fingertips, destined to live a life of luxury. And now, here he was, lying motionless on the floor, as the crowd buzzed with anxiety. The elite doctors gathered around him, their faces a mix of determination and dread. Their hands worked feverishly trying to revive him, but nothing seemed to work. Alex's color was draining, his breathing shallow and erratic, and the tension in the room thickened. Emily had seen enough medical dramas on TV to recognize the signs: a heart attack, a sudden collapse. But the sheer number of doctors now crowded around him only heightened the fear. There was no time for hesitation. For a moment, she stood frozen in place, her instincts kicking in. She wasn't one of the doctors who had spent years in medical school, nor did she have access to the latest life-saving equipment that these specialists were using. But what she did have was a deep, quiet knowledge she had kept hidden for years. Her mother's illness had forced Emily to learn more than any ordinary caregiver would have, researching and studying anything she could to help ease her mother's suffering. Along the way, she had uncovered techniques long forgotten by modern medicine, ancient methods of saving lives, techniques that most doctors today didn't even know existed. Emily felt a pull in her gut, the kind that made her body move before her mind could catch up. She knew what to do. Without hesitating, she stepped forward, her tray of empty glasses forgotten. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her hands were steady as she knelt beside Alex. A few of the doctors noticed her now, their eyes narrowing in confusion as she gently took over, ignoring their protests. Emily didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. She moved quickly and decisively, applying an ancient life-saving technique she had learned years ago. For a moment, it felt as though time stood still. The room held its breath. Then, with a shuddering gasp, Alex's chest rose as he took in his first breath. Color slowly returned to his face, and his eyes fluttered open. The entire room seemed to exhale in unison, the tension lifting as Alex's heartbeat stabilized. Emily stood back, her pulse still racing, but her face calm. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had done the impossible. She had silenced the room full of the most esteemed doctors, the elite of the medical world, who had failed where she, a mere waitress, had succeeded. Richard West stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Jessica, too, was speechless, her mouth agape as she took in the scene before her. The whispers began almost immediately, but Emily remained silent. She didn't need to explain. She had done what no one else could. And in that moment, everything changed. The whispers began to spread like wildfire. At first, they were quiet, tentative conversations shared between the doctors and guests closest to Emily. But as the minutes passed, the words began to swell, gaining momentum with every retelling. Did you see that? The waitress, she saved Alex. The astonishment in their voices was palpable, as if the idea of someone from outside their elite circle daring to intervene was too extraordinary to comprehend. Emily remained calm, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching as Alex began to regain his strength. His father, Richard, was already at his side, barking orders at the doctors around him, though there was a hint of reverence in his voice now. Richard's usual bravado was gone, replaced with a deep sense of gratitude mixed with disbelief. Jessica West, who had been standing nearby, approached Emily with a polite, almost forced smile. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice still tinged with the shock of the situation. Thank you. But Emily didn't meet her gaze. Instead, she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She had saved Alex's life, but she wasn't here to bask in the praise. She wasn't here to be anyone's hero. Her only desire was to remain invisible, to slip back into the shadows where she belonged. She turned to leave, but Jessica caught her arm. You should come with us. Let the doctors check you over. You must be exhausted. Emily resisted the urge to pull away. She had no interest in being fussed over, especially not by people who had just spent the last hour belittling her. Instead, she offered a quiet smile, a mere tilt of her lips. I'm fine. Thank you, she said, before stepping away, back into the anonymity of the crowd. She moved through the room like a ghost, barely noticed by the guests who were still whispering about the miraculous save. But as she reached the service door, her hand on the handle, a voice called after her. Wait, where are you going? Emily paused, glancing over her shoulder. It was Alex. He was standing now, looking slightly disoriented but very much alive. His father stood beside him, an arm around his shoulders, but Alex's eyes were locked on Emily. I owe you my life, he said, his voice clear but tinged with awe. How can I ever repay you? Emily's gaze flicked toward Richard, who stood nearby with a look of cautious approval. Emily had no interest in being paid back. She had no interest in being part of their world, not after all the years she had spent out of it. She didn't want money, fame, or recognition. All she wanted was to fade away, back to her quiet life. But Alex wasn't finished. I mean it, he pressed, stepping closer. You did what no one else could do. You saved me. That's worth more than anything. Please, let me help you. Emily's gaze softened, but she shook her head. I didn't do it for recognition, she said, her voice low. I did it because I knew what to do. And I just did it. Alex looked at her for a long moment, something almost unreadable in his eyes. Then he glanced at his father, who seemed to be deep in thought. Richard's expression softened for a fleeting second, but he quickly masked it with his usual air of control. "I'm sure you'll hear from us again," Richard said, his voice now tempered with something resembling respect. "We can never thank you enough for what you did tonight." Emily didn't respond. She simply nodded and turned, slipping out of the room before any more attention could be drawn to her. The door clicked shut behind her, and she leaned against it for a brief moment, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. As she made her way through the empty corridors of the hospital, her mind raced. The last few hours felt like a dream, one where she had become someone she wasn't. She had saved Alex West's life, a man who was as far removed from her own world as possible. What would that mean for her now? Would she become a part of their world again, despite all her best efforts to stay out of it? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Emily didn't turn to look, knowing instinctively who it was. "Emily, wait." She didn't stop, but Alex's voice grew louder as he approached. "Please," he said, his tone more urgent now, "just let me help you. You deserve something for what you've done." Emily paused, closing her eyes for a moment. She wasn't here to be rescued. She wasn't here for any of this. She had made her choices a long time ago. "I don't need your help, Alex," she said quietly, without turning to face him. "What I did because it was the right thing to do. And I'm fine. I don't need anything from you or your family." There was a long silence, and then Alex said something that made her pause. "You're more than just a waitress, Emily. You're capable of so much more. You have a gift. Don't let it go to waste." For the briefest moment, Emily felt a flicker of something deep inside her, something long buried. She didn't know if it was hope or fear, but it was there, and it was powerful. But then, as quickly as it came, it vanished. "I'm not who you think I am," Emily said, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm just someone trying to live my life. Please, don't make this more than it is." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alex standing there in the corridor, still unsure of what had just transpired. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, but she didn't let it stop her. She couldn't afford to let it stop her. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights glittering before her, Emily knew that her life was about to change. But she wasn't ready to face whatever that change might be, not yet. The world she had once been a part of, the world she had tried to leave behind, had a way of pulling her back. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was inextricably tied to it once again. But for tonight, she could escape. For tonight, she would be just Emily, the waitress who had saved a life. And nothing more. The next morning, Emily awoke with the weight of the previous evening pressing down on her. She hadn't been able to shake the memory of Alex's words, his earnest plea for her to accept his help. It was like a spark in the darkness, igniting something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, hope. But hope wasn't something Emily could afford. Not after everything she'd been through. The past had a way of clawing its way to the surface when she least expected it, and every time she thought she had put it to rest, it returned with a vengeance. She sat at the small kitchen table in the modest apartment she had called home for years, nursing a cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the chaos in her mind. The quiet buzz of the world outside her window seemed so far removed from her own reality. She had once been part of that world, the world of ambition, of hope, of dreams. But the moment she had walked away from medical school, those doors had closed. And she had made peace with that. At least, that's what she had convinced herself. The morning passed in a blur, and by mid-afternoon, Emily found herself back at the hospital, the place she had been trying to avoid for years. The scent of antiseptic and the sterile atmosphere greeted her as she walked through the entrance. But she wasn't here to work as a waitress. Richard West's secretary had called her earlier that day, requesting her presence at the hospital. No details were given, just an invitation to come. It was a summons, not an invitation. Emily tried to ignore the unease that swirled in her chest as she stepped into the elevator. She had no idea what Richard wanted with her, but she wasn't prepared for it. She didn't want to be caught in this world again, not in the same way she had been before. Yet, she couldn't ignore the pull of it, like gravity drawing her back. The elevator doors slid open, and she stepped into the sleek, modern lobby of the hospital. Everything about the place screamed wealth and prestige, from the polished marble floors to the glass walls that offered a view of the sprawling city below. The people here moved with purpose, each one seeming to have a role to play. They were all part of something much bigger than Emily, something she could never fully belong to. "Miss Carter," a voice called from behind her. She turned to find Jessica West standing at the entrance of the main office, her gaze sharp and calculating. "You made it," she said, though there was no warmth in her words. "I wasn't given much choice," Emily replied, her voice cool. "I was told you needed to speak with me." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "My father wanted to thank you for what you did last night. He's in his office if you'd like to speak with him." Emily hesitated but then nodded. There was no turning back now. Whatever this was, she had to face it. Jessica led her down a long, dimly lit hallway to a door marked Executive Suite. The heavy wood door swung open to reveal Richard West, seated behind a polished desk, his expression unreadable. He looked every bit the powerful businessman he was, sharp, calculated, and commanding. But his eyes softened when they met Emily's. "Emily," he said, his voice unexpectedly warm, "I owe you more than I can ever express. You saved my son's life last night." Emily gave a small, polite nod. She wasn't interested in thanks. She just wanted to get this over with. Richard didn't seem to notice her discomfort. He stood and walked around the desk, extending a hand. "Please sit. I'd like to discuss something with you." Emily glanced at Jessica, who was standing off to the side, watching silently. The unspoken tension between them was palpable. Emily could feel it, the way Jessica was measuring her, calculating her every move. But Emily sat, anyway, forcing herself to stay composed. Richard sat down across from her, his gaze intense. "I've thought a lot about last night, about how things unfolded. I don't believe in coincidences, Emily. You saved Alex, and I want to know more about you. You're not just a waitress, are you?" Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. "I'm just someone who did the right thing," she replied carefully. Richard's gaze sharpened. "No, you're much more than that. You've got knowledge, skills that even the best doctors here don't have. What is it, Emily? How is it that you were able to save my son when every single one of our renowned doctors couldn't?" Emily took a deep breath, her fingers curling tightly around the edge of the chair. She knew this moment was coming. She had anticipated it, but still, the weight of it hit her like a freight train. The last thing she wanted was to get entangled in this world again, especially not because of her medical past. "I have experience," she said, keeping her voice level. "I used a technique that I learned years ago, something not taught in medical school anymore. It's not widely practiced, but it works." Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I want you to teach it to us. I want you to come work at the hospital. Not as a waitress, but as someone who can contribute something valuable. You could be a part of something much bigger, something that could save lives." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The last time she had been in a hospital, she had been a medical student full of promise. But her family's sudden misfortune had shattered everything, her dreams, her future. She had walked away from that life, choosing something simpler, something that wouldn't tear her apart. Now, here it was, staring her in the face again. "You're asking me to return to a world that isn't mine anymore," Emily said quietly. "I'm not a part of this. I left for a reason." Richard's expression softened, though the determination in his eyes never wavered. "I know you left. But people like you, people who can save lives like that, don't just disappear. You have a gift, Emily. I can help you put it to use again. You deserve more than what you've been settling for." Emily's thoughts swirled. She could feel the temptation creeping in. The idea of returning to medicine, of using her knowledge for something greater than herself, was a powerful pull. But it wasn't just about the knowledge. It was about the life she had left behind, the life that had nearly broken her. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you think I'm the one who can help?" Richard's gaze softened, his voice low and serious. "Because you don't want anything from this world. You're not here for fame or money. You've proven that. You're here because you care about the people who need help. That's the kind of person we need." Emily's heart twisted with conflicting emotions. But she couldn't say yes, not yet. She wasn't ready. She stood, the chair scraping against the floor as she did. "I'll think about it," she said. "But I can't promise anything." Richard didn't push her. He simply nodded, his expression one of quiet understanding. As she left his office, Jessica's eyes followed her every step. Emily could feel the weight of Jessica's gaze, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. The decision she had to make wasn't about the world Richard was offering her. It was about the person she had become, the person she had worked so hard to bury. Could she really return to that life? Or had the world she once dreamed of slipped too far away to ever reach again? Her answer, she knew, was still hidden in the fog of her own past. The days after her meeting with Richard West felt like a blur, each one bleeding into the next. Emily found herself walking a tightrope, the weight of the decision she needed to make pressing down on her shoulders. The hospital's world had come rushing back into her life, and now she couldn't escape it. No matter how hard she tried to keep her distance, everything she had worked so hard to leave behind was pulling her in once more. She tried to maintain her routine, sticking to the small apartment that had been her sanctuary for so long, but the quiet felt oppressive now. She couldn't shake the feeling that the world outside was moving faster than she could keep up with. The phone calls, the emails, and the pressure from Richard to give him an answer only added to her growing anxiety. One evening, after a particularly difficult shift, Emily sat in the small diner that served as her haven. The clinking of coffee mugs and the low murmur of conversation were a welcome distraction from her racing thoughts. She hadn't seen much of Alex West since that night, and despite the way he had implored her to reconsider, she had remained firm in her decision to stay out of their world. But as the evening stretched on, Emily's thoughts inevitably drifted back to the hospital, to the weight of Richard's words, to the knowledge that she had saved Alex's life with nothing more than the experience and training she had learned years ago. The truth was undeniable. She had a gift, a rare, almost forgotten skill that could make a difference. And yet, the thought of stepping back into that world, the world of money, prestige, and power, felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked so hard to build for herself in the quiet life she had now. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Alex. "I know you're probably busy, but I just wanted to check in. I hope you're doing well. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I owe you more than I can ever express." It was simple, but there was something in the sincerity of his words that made Emily pause. He wasn't just thanking her. He was reaching out, offering something deeper than just gratitude. He was offering her a chance to do more, to make an impact. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, torn between ignoring the message and responding. She had nothing to say to him, not really. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't just trying to avoid the West family and their world, she was avoiding herself. She was avoiding the woman who could still make a difference, the woman she used to be before everything had gone wrong. But that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Her thumb swiped across the screen, typing quickly. "I'm doing okay, Alex. Thank you for checking in. I don't know what to say about everything. I'm not the person you think I am." Before she could overthink it, she pressed send. A few seconds passed, then another message popped up. "I don't think of you as anything other than who you are. You saved my life. That makes you someone special, someone I respect. Whatever you choose to do, I'll support you." The words hit her harder than she expected, and Emily let out a slow breath. She wasn't sure what Alex was expecting from her, but the sincerity in his words unsettled her. She wasn't just any waitress to him, and the reality of that realization felt like a punch in the gut. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to let someone else see her as something more than just a woman who had given up. But what if Alex was right? What if she could be more? The sound of the diner door opening pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced up, instinctively scanning the room, and her heart skipped a beat when her eyes met Alex's. He stood in the doorway, looking slightly out of place in the diner's humble setting. His tailored suit and polished appearance were a stark contrast to the worn booths and faded tablecloths. But it wasn't his clothes that caught her attention, it was the expression on his face. He looked tired, though his gaze was steady, determined even. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. "I need to talk to you." She stood up, unsure of how to respond. He had caught her off guard, and now, the thought of facing him in person felt like something she wasn't ready for. She had only been avoiding this conversation in the safety of her own mind, not expecting it to happen face to face. "I wasn't expecting you," she said, her words coming out a little more brittle than she intended. Alex smiled faintly, but there was an intensity in his eyes. "I know you're trying to keep your distance, but I need to say something to you. I think you're running from something. And I think you know it." Emily didn't answer, her heart thudding in her chest. He was right. She was running from herself, from the possibility of returning to a life that could mean more than what she had settled for. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight," Alex continued, sitting down across from her. "I just want you to think about it. Think about what you could do, what you could offer. Not just to me, not just to my father, but to people who need someone like you. Someone who doesn't care about the prestige, the money, or the fame. Someone who cares about the work." Emily's gaze shifted to the window, watching the world pass by outside. She felt as if she was on the edge of something she couldn't quite define. The temptation was strong, but the fear of what it might mean was stronger. "I don't know if I can go back to that world, Alex," she said softly. "The world of hospitals and doctors, it's not just a place. It's a system that has its flaws. I'm not sure I can be part of that again." Alex reached across the table, his hand resting lightly over hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shock through her, and she jerked her hand back, startled by the intimacy of the gesture. "You don't have to be part of their system," Alex said quietly. "But you can still make a difference. You already have." Emily looked into his eyes, searching for something, some hint that he understood the weight of the decision she had to make. She didn't know what it was she was searching for, but in that moment, she realized that she had been running not from the hospital, not from the West family, but from herself. "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Maybe I'm not ready yet. But I'll think about it. I'll think about what you said." Alex nodded, his expression softening. "That's all I ask. No pressure. Just know that you have a place if you ever want it." As he stood to leave, Emily watched him walk away, the weight of his words lingering in the air. She knew this wasn't the end, that her choice wasn't one she could avoid forever. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. And hope, Emily realized, was a dangerous thing to have. The following days seemed to stretch into eternity, each one filled with an undercurrent of unease that Emily couldn't shake. She had always been the kind of person who preferred the quiet, simple, predictable routines that kept her safe from the world's expectations. But now, after Alex's visit, after the weight of his words, everything felt uncertain, like the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She had been avoiding this decision for too long, but now it was impossible to ignore. She found herself walking to the hospital again, the same familiar route that had once felt like a road to freedom. But now, it felt like a road to something else, a place where her past could come crashing back into her life. The decision she had been postponing was now unavoidable. Richard had made it clear that he wasn't going to let her slip away quietly. The West family, for better or worse, had already set their sights on her, and whether she liked it or not, her quiet life was slipping through her fingers. As she walked through the hospital doors, the air felt colder than usual, the hum of machines and murmurs of staff a stark contrast to the stillness that had surrounded her the past few days. Emily hadn't come here to work, she had come to make a decision. And though she wasn't sure she was ready, the feeling in her gut told her that this meeting, whatever it was, would determine her future. "Miss Carter, over here," came the voice of Richard's secretary, pulling her from her thoughts. The secretary led her up to the executive floor, a place Emily had never been before. The hallway was lined with modern art and gleaming surfaces, each room more luxurious than the last. When they finally arrived at Richard's office, Emily was surprised to find that Jessica wasn't waiting by the door. She had assumed her presence would be mandatory, yet here, it was just her and Richard. Richard stood when she entered, the expression on his face unreadable, though there was something in his eyes, an urgency, perhaps a quiet desperation. He gestured for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm, but there was a distinct edge to it. "I know this has all happened quickly, but I wanted to speak with you face to face. I believe you have a unique perspective, Emily, something that could bring real change to this hospital. And I think you know that." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had never been one for grandiose speeches or promises. All she wanted was peace, not another complication in her already complicated life. "I'm not here to be your charity case, Richard," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not looking to be a part of the system. Not the way you want me to be. I've lived outside of it for a long time now, and I'm okay with that." Richard's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to join us for the sake of it, Emily. I'm asking you to help us make a difference. Your knowledge, your ability to think outside the box, it's something that could change lives. There's an opportunity here to do something meaningful. Something that goes beyond the money, beyond the prestige." Emily met his gaze, her heart racing. "And what exactly is it that you want me to do? I'm not a trained doctor. I'm not even part of the medical community anymore. I'm a waitress, Richard. A caregiver, yes, but I'm not your solution." Richard's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. "You're more than that. You know it and I know it. I want you to help us pioneer a new approach to patient care. I want you to help us find solutions for the things that are ignored in traditional medicine, the things people don't want to talk about. There's power in the kind of work you did with Alex, Emily. And I believe it's something that could shape the future of healthcare." Emily could feel the pull of his words, the weight of his expectation. It was tempting, more tempting than anything she had ever felt in a long time. She could be part of something bigger, something that could change the system from the inside out. But there was a fear in her heart, one she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Could she really go back? Could she step back into a world that had once consumed her? She had left that life for a reason, but now, it was like a ghost she couldn't outrun. "I can't promise anything," she said, her voice quiet, but resolute. "I don't belong here anymore, Richard. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not." He didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice quiet and persistent. "I'm not asking you to pretend to be someone else. I'm asking you to be who you are. The woman who saved my son. The woman who has knowledge that could make a real difference." The silence between them stretched, and for a long moment, Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. He was right in a way. She had knowledge, practical, life-saving knowledge that most doctors would never have. She had saved Alex's life when no one else could. That knowledge had value, and she couldn't deny that. But was that enough? Could she set aside her doubts, her past, and step into a world that demanded so much more than she was prepared to give? "You're asking me to join your hospital," she said slowly, her thoughts swirling. "But this isn't just about saving lives, is it? It's about power, influence, a reputation. You want me because I'm different. You want me because I'm a tool that can help you move ahead. I'm not a part of your system, Richard, and I'm not sure I ever want to be." Richard didn't look angry, though Emily could see the faintest flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "I want you because I believe you can change things, Emily. Not because I need a tool. You're not a tool. You're a person with real power to make a difference. And I want to give you the opportunity to use that power." Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She needed to move, to think. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. She had to get out of there. "I don't have all the answers," she said, her voice catching. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for this." Richard watched her with a steady gaze. "Take your time. I won't push you, Emily. But know that the offer stands. Whenever you're ready." As she left Richard's office, the weight of his words seemed to follow her. The choice was hers. She could walk away, keep her distance, and remain in the quiet life she had built. Or she could step back into the world she had left behind, a world of medicine, power, and prestige. The problem was, Emily wasn't sure which path was the right one anymore. The woman she had become, the woman she was fighting to protect, was at odds with the woman she could be. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could reconcile both.